Hello and welcome to the MTG Pro Life podcast. I'm Jacob, and today we're joined by my friend Alexander Hayne, who is a member of the Rivals, former member of the MPL, Rookie of the Year, 2 Pro Tour top 8s, including a win, 12 Grand Prix top 8s, including 5 wins. His peak ELO was 2209, so probably pretty high up overall. He was the number one Mythic on Arena during the most competitive time, during the Mythic Invitational qualification time. Former Canadian national captain, number 28 all-time money list with 267k, but I assume over 300k, counting non-Wizards tournaments. And he has his own podcast with KYT called Table for Two. Thanks, Alex, for coming here.
Thank you, Jacob. I'm happy you managed to do all this research. I learned some new things about myself, from
Yeah, there are some very dedicated fan websites out there.
good to know. So yeah, I'm happy to be here on your show. Uh, I
So,
miss the times when we would hang out and make troll videos more. I think we still get fans tweeting about us for those stuff all the time.
yeah, that's one of my most common requests. So, I see in my research that your first Grand Prix was Montreal '07, where you live, but did you start playing Magic before that?
Yeah, I started playing Magic basically like a couple years before that, in uh, a bit before original Ravnica came out,
And
and
how old were you?
I was 17, I believe, when
Okay.
I started playing.
And were you playing casually or were you competitive right away?
So I started playing basically. I was at Cégep, which is in Quebec. It's basically like they take 1 year off of high school and 1 year off of university, and then there's like this thing in between called Cégep, where so I was there. It was it's kind of a new experience. It's like going to college for the first time. You have a bit more independence and kind of do your own things and meet more like-minded people. And I met a friend there who I played. I was involved with some clubs like the chess club, and I played some poker too. And this guy's like, "Hey, what game you like? Magic." And so he introduced me to that. And kind of at the school, there's a large group of people who would basically play like casually in the lounge. It's kind of just bring whatever deck you have, and we played multiplayer. And that's how I got introduced to Magic at first. But
That
kind
sounds
of for me,
fun at the time, but
yeah, it's
now
fun. I mean,
multiplayer sounds awful.
oh no, now I like to think it's like I can't go back. It's a one way street. I think competitive Magic, like when you move on, a lot of people I find at the at least top levels of competitive Magic, a lot of their enjoyment comes from the competition. It's very hard to let go of playing to win and just play commander where one person just can kill everybody, but you just keep playing to see who can make the biggest board. For some people that's really fun, and I think like 2005 me would have loved that, would have loved commander existing, would have been my favorite thing. But I'm a long way past that. And in fact, even then, like, because of kind of my chess background of going to tournaments, I I was brought my friend brought me to the store, and turns they have had F&M, and so I that kind of got me started on on playing tournaments, and eventually worked my way up to PTQs.
When you were playing PTQs, were there any players people would recognize the names of who were playing at the same time as you?
Yeah, I mean, it changed during like who the dominant local players were at the time. uh Certainly, like, the when I started playing PTQs, like the top player, Canadian player, was Rich Hohen, and he was like on the pro scene, so he wasn't playing PTQs. But there were some people who were like, you know, half kind of on, half off. So they're still playing PTQs, but they're also relatively regularly playing pro tours. And those people were like Guillaume Carnet, uh, Guillaume Dao, Francis Cormier, Yi Cheng, and uh, I guess that's JLR, I guess, as well. Um, and then yes, people you've probably never heard of most for the most part,
Yeah.
but they're like Grand Prix winners and Pro Tour top eighters among them.
Okay.
But the Montreal scene kind of was when I started playing wasn't very strong. It was kind of it was kind of in a lull. I don't know if actually the Montreal scene had ever really been like that good. I think it kind of entered a golden age around the time that I was pushing it up because a lot of what I wanted to get better, and there weren't necessarily a lot of good players around me. So my goal was to like try and make the players around me better, so that it'd be better competition.
Did you play Magic Online?
I played some Magic Online. Yeah, I quit after about playing for about a year and a half. I found it was pretty toxic for my mental state, and I didn't like how I was on it. Like I wasn't necessarily the guy who would type in chat raging, but I kind of still felt those urges because I was not in a good space in my life, and I had magic was like became too important, to kind of my sense of identity. And so when I would lose, it was like a reflection on myself,
I do know. I
Yeah,
also felt Magic was really important, and every win or loss was tied to my self worth at one point.
yeah, exactly. And so like I played Magic Online for a while. I made some money doing it, and I definitely got better. Like I think up to a certain point, Magic Online is a hugely valuable resource to getting better. I think like John Finkel once said that Magic Online is really powerful tool to get good at Magic, but to get great at Magic, you have to play with other great players. Um, and I think yeah, it definitely like I played Magic Online to in terms of time period was around when Lorwyn Morningtide was out because I made the deck I played the most was Fairies, and I farmed a lot of things with that and played against some famous players at times. Like most notably, I guess Joshua Layton. I'd battle him in the queues a bunch, and usually, you know, I guess I'm bragging, but I was going to say not to brag, but I would beat him most of the time.
Yeah, very direct brag.
Yes, direct brag. Yes.
I was also playing against Raptor at the time, but
But in real life, right?
yeah, like local 1Ks.
Yeah, yeah. So like, you have the experience of kind of playing against that type of player in your local scene, but I didn't really have that. Like in my local scene, the players who were better tended would very rarely show up for events. You would almost never see them at the local level, and like there weren't really 1Ks to start until I started to get pretty good, and then kind of face to face games started around the time that I start. I'd been competitive for a while, and uh, it became a store where the competitive scene thrived because they would have basically weekly tournaments where like the winner would get a Mox or winner would get four Jace the Mind Sculptors or something, and those tournaments would just bring out all the best players would want to play them, every week, and the competition was pretty good, and I think that's the type of environment you want when you're trying to, cultivate people who are good at Magic, not necessarily a large Magic scene, but a competitive one.
Yeah, I agree. That's a great place to get better. So what? When that was happening, were you still in school?
Um, yeah. So at that point in time, I was no longer in school. Like, I I dropped out. I guess it was around 2008, 2009 when I dropped out. Um, Mainly, basically due to my depression. I was just not able to function at all, and that was also time when like I started around when I was starting to play Magic Online, and the two combined poorly, so I had to quit Magic Online, which is good. But Magic in person was very helpful in that it was one of the only things that would get me out of the house and going to see people and doing something. And it was one of the only things I enjoyed doing. So
Yeah, I think Magic can be a great escape when you're playing the game. You can focus entirely on the game, and like you said, you get to go outside and see other people.
Yeah, no, it was really wonderful for me. I think in that time, and it kind of, it didn't fully heal me or anything, but it just like helped pull me out a little bit and allowed me to function kind of. And it was fun. I mean, you go to a local shop and kind of, you know, this is the thing that I think women want in Magic is that they want to just go there and not be judged and not be just be another Magic player, right? You're just and in that environment, I could just be kind of free, and I would just could just focus on the game, and the rest of my life kind of would disappear. And you could make made a lot of friends basically just on like who you were and how you played the game, and nothing beyond that, and kind of not being too far removed from like the culture of high school where is like everybody's having trying to be cool or caring about like appearances all the time. It was kind of refreshing in that way, and I made a lot of friends while improving at the game, and I kind of felt like you know I felt more worthwhile.
Yeah, I can understand that. So that was in '08 and '09, and then I see in my research in 2010 and 2011 you were playing a lot of Grand Prix. When was your first Pro Tour?
So my first pro tour was in 2011. So I I played a bunch of I did I play a bunch of Grand Prix in
Well,
2010?
not a bunch, but that's maybe like
Couple.
three.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, basically I would play Grand Prix within driving distance. And I didn't drive myself, but had a good community, and I think the first after GP Montreal 2007, I think the first Grand Prix I played was in Philadelphia, where I won a Grand Prix trial against actually a pretty solid top eight. I think at the time Grand Prix trials were actually something kind of in our local community because we didn't necessarily get that many high level tournaments.
Grand Prix trials are really good back in the day. Nowadays they give you two buys if they
Yeah,
even exist anymore, but they used to give you three, so it was a big
right.
deal.
So I had three buys and kind of a whole bunch of us, including Pascal Maynard, who I started would have some overlap with, even though he lived in Quebec City, which is like 3 hours away. He was also kind of up and coming around the same time, and we got to know each other at like an MSS Magic Scholarship Series, which is a thing that existed after JSS. So I kind of got lucky in that I never played Magic when I was young enough to be in JSS. I kind of just got in right as the Magic Scholarship Series existed, and then kind of got too old for it right when they stopped doing it. So I got in the sweet period there. But
That's cool.
that's where I met Pascal the first time. But yeah, so Philadelphia, we had a big car, and of course I did horribly. I don't think I think I went like 03 after my buys or something. But 2010, I started to play a few more Grand Prix, and 2011 I finally won a PTQ. Uh, right about when I was like starting to give up on the
Yeah, that's a pretty long time from when you start. I mean, not in general,
yeah
but for what I would assume for a good player like you, for when you started trying to qualify to when you qualified.
yeah. I mean, it's a combination of a few things. Like there weren't that many PTQs to play. A lot of players, their experiences, they could play a PTQ like every weekend.
Yeah, I mean, personally, I was often playing two every weekend.
Right, and for kind of for us in Montreal, at least at the time, it was like a PTQ was a major event. Like we would play tests like for weeks. It was kind of like it's like how a pro tour is now. Even I probably don't even try as hard for a pro tour now as I would for PTQs back then. And I would get to play like two a season, maybe a third one if a car would get together to go to Toronto or something.
It must have been
So
particularly heartbreaking to lose in the top eight.
yeah, I mean, I lost a lot in the top eight. I believe I have 14 PTQ top eights with one win.
All
So
right.
kind of I got the opposite experience with my Grand Prix and Pro Tour, where I have like one of the highest win percentages in the top eight. But back then I would not. There was one stretch where I played three PTQs, one in Toronto, two in Montreal, and I lost in the finals of all three, back to back to back.
That's very sad.
It was
They didn't have pity invites back then.
there was no pity invites, there were no sponsor exemption or whatever you want to call it, and you'd think, oh, maybe get a rating invite, but because kind of these communities were relatively insular, I would make top eight of a PTQ and lose rating points because I lost once, or even if I double ID'd and I would lose rating points. So
did you find yourself getting jealous with the other players?
yeah, I definitely did, especially like because I kind of was known in the local community as the best player for a while, even though I'd never qualified for the Pro Tour. And like people who would qualify, I would help them test and prepare. Even like 1 year, Pascal, J. Elrar, and Vincent Thibault were like the Canadian national team, and I helped. They came to Montreal. Pascal came to Montreal, and I helped them test. And they left, and like a couple other guys were like, so how does it feel that they're all qualified and you're just better than them and you're not qualified? Like, well, it doesn't feel great, but it is what it is, right? At the time, I maybe wasn't so pragmatic with my
Yeah.
I was very frustrated that I could never seem to qualify, no matter how good I got, and I just felt like I would always just come up just short. And yeah, I mean, I wouldn't get that many chances. Basically, I would get to play like maybe 6 or 7 PTQs a year would be basically it, and it would sting every time that you would miss out. But eventually, in 2011, I drove with some friends to London, Ontario, which is the furthest I'd ever gone for a PTQ, and I managed to win, beating Rich Hohen actually in the top 4 of that PTQ.
Nice. Did you know him
And,
before that?
I didn't know him personally. I'd only from reputation. As at the time he was the most accomplished Canadian Magic player.
I didn't know this, but he has like 4 PT top 8 misses on tiebreakers. So
Yeah, he's got a 9th, 10th, 11th, and 12th, I believe.
so he could be in the Hall of Fame if he had Minguchi style luck. But
Yeah, or Paulo style tiebreaker luck too. Like there's all sorts of stuff that's kind of on the margins that kind of a casual observer of pro magic wouldn't necessarily see, but that if you look a little deeper, you can find like, you know, someone like Ivan Flock, who we both know, pretty well, that like, you know, the PT was it Aether Revolt, I believe, that Lucas Esper Bertud won.
yeah,
That like Paulo came in 8th by like point 0.1, like by like 1% tiebreaker difference from Ivan. If Ivan makes top 8 there, he's probably in the Hall of Fame. And
yeah,
those are kind of the margins that
it's okay. Paulo needed it.
yeah, Paulo definitely needed his 15th or whatever top 8, but I mean that's what it is. But yeah, Rich is definitely he's past his prime at this point, but he was a force to be reckoned with. And the PTQ, however, was constructed. He's still a great player, but he's always been more of a limited player. And I had, I think, a good matchup, and I managed to beat him, kind of setting way for our rematches in GP Montreal later that year. But so I was playing Pyromancer's Ascension. This was in like Cobblade Standard when Jace and Stoneforge had both been banned.
Really powerful format. There was like
It
fetch
was
lands, preordained, ponder, lightning bolt.
Yeah, and, Jataxian Probe too.
Yeah,
Which the time was like, oh, whatever, that's the card. Splinter Twin combo was legal in Standard.
there's Valakut, Goblin Guide.
Yeah, oh yeah, it was incredibly. It was like what Modern looked like until the last couple of years, basically. And yeah, so I was playing this Pyromancer's Ascension deck with 4 Ponder, 4 Preordained, 4 Jataxian Probe, 4 Lightning Bolt, 4 Mana Leak, which is also a card in that standard. And kind of you would just activate Pyromancer's Ascension, and then your card advantage spells would just be too overwhelming, and you eventually had like two call the mines, you could recur lightning bolts is infinitely and kill them. And yeah, so I managed to win that PTQ, and I was pretty happy about that, you know, because it was a long time of kind of trying before I finally got that, and that qualified me for actually the first ever modern pro tour, which was Philadelphia.
That was my
And
first pro tour as well.
yeah, congratulations, great first pro tour. And yeah, I mean, I ended up playing a Splinter Twin deck with sideboard Tarmogoyfs. Not sure about the sideboard Tarmogoyfs, but Splinter Twin was good, I think.
Who did you
For
prepare with?
I prepared with Pascal Maynard as well as some other friends, Rob Anderson, Marcel, Angelo Zafra, and Justin Richardson. Who,
Okay, I know some of them.
yeah, I mean, Justin Richardson since then has been on the national team. Rob Anderson's won a Grand Prix, and Marcel, I think, has top 8 at a Grand Prix. And you know, it was at the time that was basically the testing that I had available. You know, I didn't have any pro teams access to that. I was not a superstar or anything. I just tested with the local people, you know, Canadians who were good. Um, Pascal kind of had his break a little earlier that year onto the scene, and you know was close to kind of getting to a pro level that would qualify him for everything. What you know people would think of as gold, but at the time was level 4. He was level 3 and kind of needed like one more pro point, I think, to get to level 4, but ended up missing despite trying a bunch.
As you were starting out, was it easy for you to travel to events, buy cards, and buy flights and
No, I mean,
hotels?
I did not have much money, which is why, and I would only go to Grand Prix that I could drive to, and it was like the Grand Prix in Philadelphia I mentioned. There were 6 of us in a van or whatever, and we drove in. We you know that you'd think, oh, you know, split up into hotel rooms. Now I stay in a hotel room like usually with one other person, but back then I think we were 7 or 8 in a hotel room. You
Yeah,
know,
that I
like you
I
know,
have similar situations, which was quite absurd.
it's completely absurd. But you know, I didn't have any money, and couldn't really afford to spend hundreds of dollars on a weekend Grand Prix. You know, even the entry fees back then were a lot lower. I think if it was $100 to enter, I just I just wouldn't have gone.
Yeah, back my first Grand Prix was Grand Prix Oakland. It cost $25 to enter, and you got a playmat and a foil jet. Where
Yeah,
nowadays it costs 100, you don't even get the playmat.
right. You don't get you get a lightning bolt at least
Yeah.
now, but I remember getting I have a lot of progenitors. I'll say that.
The
But
Mutavaults did go up in price, but
yeah, Mutavault's fine. Progenitus is what like maybe one deck ever plays it, and it's a one
yeah.
of. Why would you make that? You know,
So,
it's
oh,
like
a while ago you mentioned something about how women want to just be like one of everyone else at the game store, and
yeah.
I can imagine things would have been a lot more difficult trying to travel and stay in hotel rooms as
Of
a
course,
woman.
yeah. No, I mean, I've talked about this on other things. I don't know if on a podcast, but how those are kind of the disadvantages. People are like, oh, you know, why do women not perform as well? They have you know they have just as much of a chance in a game of Magic as a man to win. There's no sexism there, but the sexism exists in other places. Like, for example, you know, if I was a woman, I would not have been able to go to this tournament. I would not have been able to like go to the card store and get these connections with other people. And you know, not only like would it not have been acceptable in the crowds that I was with, but also my parents would never have allowed this. And I just, you know, I don't know where I would be. I'd probably just not be playing Magic right now for better or worse. You know,
Yeah,
maybe better for me, but there would not be there would not be a pro like me coming out of the woodwork if I was I think if I was a woman, because I just wouldn't have had those chances.
yeah. I think
Uh,
so many things would have just been out of the question.
yeah, I think like the financial barrier is a huge one for Magic that doesn't really, you know, some people talk about it like, oh, it's Magic's just pay to win. You just need to buy the best cards and you win. And anybody who plays on a real competitive level knows that's not really true, because at the level we play at, everybody kind of, for the most part, has access to whatever cards they need for the tournament.
And
But
there's really close knit communities. Like when you're going to a pro tour, people are happy to lend you cards.
exactly, yeah. Um, and but at a lower level, that is the case. At a local game shop, I mean, some of my early experiences was I went to a game shop and there's this, everybody's like, oh, there's this one guy, he's got so many rares in his deck, you know, and of course he was really bad, and I'd always beat him. But it was I came into that shop and it was just a different environment than like the face to face FNMs that I was used to, where everybody was prepared and everybody was competitive. In this shop, you know, this one guy had just jammed a whole bunch of rares in and it's just showing off, and most people just had you know random cards thrown together. They weren't aware of like the internet metagame and buying cards, and so that is the experience for a lot of people. And in the competitive scene, there's just so many costs beyond just the cards, where now it seems like the way things are, you need like a different deck to be competitive every week. That's a pretty big cost if you're not in these communities. But also the cost of of just travel and tournament entries is is huge, and the cost of time. Now you have to have an arena and moto and real life collection. So
Yeah, it
uh,
really is a hobby for the rich.
yeah, and at the time I got into it, I didn't have much money, and thankfully it was a lot cheaper. Um, but yeah, it was that you say I went to three Grand Prix in 2010. For example, in 2011 I went to, I think, a few more than that. One thing is, I guess, my first pro tour in Philadelphia ended up not making day two with a 4-4 record, which
Me too.
would make day two nowadays, or I guess would have in the recently until the switch over to regional pro tours. And yeah, I lost the last round playing for day two at the time. The round before that, I beat Raphael Levy, and I believe I played Ben Friedman as well in the rounds, though I didn't know who he was at the time. And ultimately, I felt that I had squandered my chance. I felt I played horribly, and I felt the pro tour wasn't what I'd imagined. Where I'd been watching coverage, and I thought it was all these great players, and frankly, most of the people I played against just did not impress me that much. And it was kind of a moment where that I think a lot of people have with the pro tour, that they decide they either want to, they're not interested anymore, or they want to get good enough to be at those top tables where you really do get those intense matches. Uh, I wasn't sure uh, that I really wanted to continue, but 2 weeks later was hometown GP Montreal 2011, which was kind of my first breakout pro performance. Uh, I managed to go 801 on day one, which was actually my first Grand Prix day two,
Nice.
and then I 3-0'd the first draft, and then beating Rich Hohen in one of the rounds, who eventually would also make the top eight. But he then called me his nemesis because I'd beaten him in the PTQ top four and and in the draft pot at undefeated or whatever. And then I beat a young Matt Costa in the first round of the second draft, and then I could draw into the top eight. I ended up losing in the finals to Rich, so he got his revenge, which I think I tell people I think was good for my career, because then he liked me instead of disliking me.
Yeah.
And it did afford me some opportunities, I think, that maybe I wouldn't have had if I'd beaten him. So that that tournament provided a bunch of things for me. One, uh, it provided an invite to PT Honolulu in 2012. Two, I got enough rating points that I qualified for World in San Francisco 2011. And three, I got a bunch of money, which for me now is not that much, but at the time, $2,000 or whatever was an enormous amount of money. Uh,
Yeah, I can imagine if like for people listening, like if you're trying to split a hotel room 7 ways
Yeah.
instead of 6 ways, $2,000 is a lot of money.
Yeah. I mean, it was just I. It was basically as much money as I had or whatever at the time, and I ended up using that money to go to future tournaments. Right. That's kind of how the system often worked. Back then, you didn't get a just like I guess again now you don't didn't get a flight to pro tours from Grand Prix top eights. However, there was Planeswalker point system was rolling out, and for Honolulu, there if you had one of the top, I think it was 100 Planeswalker point earners, you get an invite and a flight. I already had an invite, but I wanted the flight because I looked and flights to Honolulu were not cheap. Uh, so I actually looked, and Pascal, who was looking for one more pro point to get to level 4, uh, he was planning to go to GP Amsterdam, which was a legacy Grand Prix. And I looked at the flights, and and I calculated the Planeswalker point out, payouts, and basically figured that it was a lot cheaper to fly to Amsterdam. And then from the Planeswalker points from that, I would basically be pretty much guaranteed to get a flight to Honolulu. So I ended up going to GP Amsterdam mainly just for the Planeswalker points. But uh, I ended up conceding the last round of day 1 when we were going to draw ourselves both out of day 2, and my opponent would made it instead.
So even just one day of the Grand Prix was enough points?
Yeah.
Okay.
I mean, I was ready at the time. I was playing F&M every week, and uh, I had the points from the Pro Tour and the GP that I had quite a few points, so I still needed to play F&Ms, but I was safely in there from that playing that GP. Just the way the multipliers worked was kind of crazy. I'm glad that they they changed that system. I'll say that. But
Yeah, I was at Worlds that year playing side events trying to get Planeswalker points, and there was so much collusion. Like,
oh yeah,
there were
I was at
three-round
World playing
tournaments,
the
and
main event, and I remember Paulo, made top 8 of the main event, and one of his friends just played side events, and Paulo got fewer Planeswalker points.
yeah, like there are good players in these side events. There's Carlos
Yeah,
Romao, and
yeah.
like
A
they're
lot of people just flew out there just to play them because the multipliers were so high. They would just like join the event just to get like the sign up bonus for multiple events. It was incredibly stupid, and it kind of just shows that gamers are going to game. You need to find someone who's going to push a system to its max to design these systems, because gamers are not going to act in normal, entirely rational ways. But yeah, so after that, I then for Worlds I was qualified on rating, and uh, I grouped up again with some Canadians who were qualified, which this point included Dan Lanthier, uh, Noah Long, and David Kaplan, most importantly.
pretty good players.
And we went to Grand Prix in San Diego. Pascal went as well because again he was searching for that last point, which he ended up not getting, losing the last round in kind of heartbreaker fashion.
Do you know who
Uh,
won that Grand Prix?
I believe one young man at the time who
Very young
people were like,
man.
"Hey, this kid might be kind of good." Shahar Shenhar, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Um, and yes, I think I and then Worlds. We tested, and it was pretty good. David Kaplan ended up making top 4 both Worlds, and he was also qualified. The reason way he qualified through Worlds was from the mocks, and he made top 4 of that as well.
Yeah, I didn't know David at the time, but I remember watching and I was impressed. Was
Yeah,
that,
no,
did you
he
know
was.
him
I
before
didn't
that?
really know him before that. No, no, just like testing for those events and hanging for the 2 tournaments. But that type of experience, like bonds people together. And I tested really hard for him, especially for his top 8 match against PV. And I think I came up with a sideboard plan that kind of next leveled what Paulo was doing, and he ended up profiting off of that. and that was I was really 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 incredible against mono red, which is what Kaplan was playing. So we couldn't even figure out like how he would board, and just we're just like, look, you just you can't win, and he's not. But uh, that Kaplan and I decided that we are gonna continue working together since we both qualified for the next pro tour, and we both had after that a similar number of pro points because I didn't do incredibly well at that pro tour, but I I locked myself into level 3, which is like silver. Basically, I had a floating invite, which meant that I was qualified not only for Honolulu but also for Barcelona. Uh, and I remember particularly from this event, I was playing in the last round. I was playing against a somewhat known Japanese pro player, Kira Asahara, and
Is that
that's
Riser?
when I was like, I was locked for getting the number of pro points I needed, and if at the time with the culture, probably if I was playing against someone who at the table next to me, more again, my opponent might have asked me for concession, I would have just given it because it didn't matter. But there I was playing, and I kind of just would have just conceded. I didn't care, right? And I just played my match really loosely, didn't try that hard, and lost. And then I remember looking at the standings afterwards, and I finished like 56 or something, and I got $600. And I looked if I won, he came Akira I think came like 23rd or 24th for like 2,000 or $3,000, and I was just like, oh my god, what have I done? Because again, that is just such a huge amount of money for me at the time, and I just didn't realize that that match was actually incredibly high stakes. I'd kind of tunnel vision on just the points mattering. That was a good lesson.
Yeah, but that was, yeah, that's unfortunate that happened. But that was one of your first pro tours, and you did cash and do pretty well. Was that your first
Yeah,
cash?
yeah, that was my first cash, my second pro tour.
That's pretty
Yeah, I
good.
mean, I started off. I I I learned a lot that tournament too. I mean, because I think I played mostly fairly well, but there were a lot of spots where I realized I could have done better, and kind of I could see later how those would, you know, clearly turn into more value for me. Like that last round, for example, I think I probably could have won, and there's immediately, $1,500 that I missed out on. Or I started the tournament 4-0 in standard, and round five I made like a small error that ended up me losing the match. My opponent was the eventual world champion that year, Inaga. So maybe if I win that match instead, I don't make that error. I end up going on a great trajectory and end up maybe winning the tournament myself. Who knows? Uh, but that event kind of had the opposite effect of Philadelphia to me, and it kind of reinvigorated me and made me want to do better. Also, Rich Hone was qualified for that event as well from rating from GP Montreal, and he introduced me to a bunch of pros. And at the time with Planeswalker points, everybody was fairly pessimistic about the future of Magic, but Rich introduced me as the future of Canadian Magic, and they all laughed and said, "Ah, the future of Magic's dead. Da, da, da. Who's this kid? Whatever." And uh, it's kind of funny in hindsight to remember this dinner where I'm like sitting with Ben Sack and Yelger, and they're all ordering like these expensive meals, and I'm like looking at the menu and like, this thing's $9. I'll get that. And then they're like, "Oh, credit card game."
Did you ever partake in credit card games that you should not have?
No, I was too responsible.
That's
I
good.
mean, even I remember a time where like I just got I at a restaurant with Jerry T, and I just got water instead. Everybody else got soda, and he's like, "Haha, you're fat" or something, jokingly with me. And I'm like, "No, I'm not getting a soda because I'm poor. I'm fat." $2 or whatever. If I could save $2 every meal, I could stretch things more. Um, And yeah, so I wouldn't credit card games. Certainly not when everybody else spent like $50 and I spent $9 or whatever. I just knew I couldn't afford it. Um, like I probably could have paid if I lost, but then I just wouldn't have money for other things. Is the thing. So I end up most of my money got spent on plane tickets and stuff. Uh, so I guess going on from that, I had my second GP cash in Orlando in early 2012, which was I guess I the flight was cheap, the hotel was cheap, and winter in Canada is kind of brutal, so it seemed like a sweet thing. Could go and see Disneyland, Universal Studios, and yeah, I did okay at the GP. I played Delver, uh, played against some good players, and kind of reinforced after a few GPs that I'd kind of bricked off of since my GP top eight that I could do this. I only got to play a couple more GPs that year. If I had more money, I would have played more and then would have been in better shape to get gold. But as it turned out, after losing match playing for pro points in Honolulu, I ended up going into Barcelona needing to go top 75 to get gold. And so, the story for that event, of course, is David Kaplan again were working together, and he's like incredibly good at finding travel deals. And so at that time, similarly to now, I guess cruise ships were having large sales. uh, this time because there'd been a cruise ship accident, some incompetent captain, and that just made for some reason everybody just is scared that that's going to happen to them, even though as a rational actor you realize that that's an isolated incident. And so cruise ships were really cheap, and found it was actually cheaper to take a cruise ship to Barcelona than to fly there.
Yeah,
And
I've
that would
always
include
found that
two.
appealing once you said that, but I've never actually done it.
Yeah, I mean it's not normally cheaper, I'll say. I mean 2 weeks of food and lodging is well included, and so it's like our own private testing house. We thought we'd try and get other people along, but other people either didn't have the time, the money, or the inclination to really go. So it ended up being just David Kaplan and I, and it was really an experience of a lifetime. I mean, the trip was just great. It was kind of vacation plus magic testing at the same time. Uh,
Were you always at sea or did you dock anywhere?
no, we docked a lot. I'd say about half the time. Obviously crossing the Atlantic. There's no places to dock there, so that was like 5 days of just being at sea. But basically almost every other day we'd stop somewhere. We started in the Caribbean and then would stop around the Mediterranean area, and finally ended up in Barcelona. And yeah, it was great. I mean, it's like it's in some ways the most conducive to testing environment that I've ever been in, where you can get food effortlessly. It doesn't take any time. You have a ton of space and random activities you can do. You have your room, and you're also traveling at the same time. Plus, you have opportunities for breaks to go out and do stuff. Uh, but on the other hand, you're also stuck inside, so you kind of push to test that way, and end up coming up with the miracle deck. Pretty much, we got into Barcelona and then met up with a whole bunch of other people in a team there afterwards for another week. But the deck, I think, changed by one card in that time. It was basically all set on the cruise ship. I think we moved one counter spell to the main deck or something. Was the maybe the only change.
Were you and Kaplan very proactive and confident in recommending it to other people?
Somewhat. I mean, so I'm when it comes to decks that I make, I'm never that confident in them. But we were testing with the deck, and we were, originally we posted on like our online forums. Basically, this is the deck that we think it's really good, and kind of the progression of it. And other people weren't necessarily winning that much with it, but it was a very challenging deck to play. In some matchups, like if you watch the top eight playing against hexproof deck, those matchups there's not too much to do. You kind of just hope you hit your miracles. But in there's other matchups like the control matchups or more mid-rangey matchups where there's a lot of maneuvering you can do, and the deck also is just very counterintuitive to play. So I wrote a guide, kind of tongue in cheek, that later ended up getting published actually to my teammates of how to play the deck. And after that, after I wrote that guide, they started winning more with it. So it was effective at least. Uh, and then yeah, we met up and tested that deck and all sorts of other decks, and you know the deck definitely lost to the red white Boros aggro deck, which was kind of the front runner at the time, but it was very good against the all the mid range decks. And
So you were kind of on level two because red white
oh,
aggro was
yeah,
the the front
yeah, it was the
runner, but
deck to beat.
it ended up doing really badly, and everyone just played mid range.
Right, yeah, like Wolfear Silverheart was just such a big card that I think the level one people didn't respect enough. Maybe that just changed how the format was. And when we went to the site and found out they were like all sold out and were like 30 or 40 euros or something each, we were just like all high fiving each other. But even then, I still had moments of doubt. I had like a backup deck, and uh, Kaplan basically on the walk back to our hotel had to like convince me to end up playing the Miracles deck that night before. Uh, and and certainly there were a lot of people that I tried to convince not to play it, who I could see that they were not going to be successful with it. But mostly everybody just kind of mostly wanted to be on the team deck, and it felt strong. It had a feeling of like maybe we broke the format, because it was doing such powerful things. It's hard because you don't necessarily see the consistency, and a lot of our results were like with someone playing like behind some of the people playing, like often me watching and saying like, why didn't you do this? And they would win making my play, but they would lose making the other play. And a lot of what I tested though that week was limited. Pascal came in and he basically had the idea to draft mono black in, or at least black based control decks in that format when most people were avoiding black.
Yeah, I remember there was some enchantment that was really powerful in black.
Yeah, homicidal seclusion was the powerful enchantment because the black decks there were based around really having one creature in play, and homicidal seclusion was like +3/+1 if you have only, and lifelink if you have only one creature.
Yeah,
Uh,
a very strong card.
yeah, and just in general, like black was underdrafted, so we didn't decide to force black, but we were kind of much more likely to play black, I think, than other people were. And worked out for me. I drafted black decks both times and went 6-0 and limited. First
Yeah,
time like blue
you'll
black control, and the second time red black like mid range or whatever with homicidal exclusion in both my decks. Actually, 3 copies in the blue black deck. Uh,
draft is really the key to pro tour success.
yeah, no, it's crazy. I mean, both my pro tour, like I went 6-0 that time and 5-1 in my other pro tour top eight, and it's I've gone 5-1 a couple other times in draft. And I think top 16 because there's just so much more of an edge I think you can gain compared to constructed, except for those few times where you really do break the format. But even then, I think even a broken deck in constructed wins 70% of the time, let's say. And in limited, I think if you can easily have like a 75% edge. So it's huge. And really my 6-0 unlimited and that PT was what brought me into the top eight, because I went 6-3-1 in constructed. Nothing horrible or anything, but not like a record you expect a top eight approacher with. It was really the 6-0 unlimited.
Yeah, that's a only an okay record, but
Yeah,
seeing how you won the top 8 rounds is a really good record overall.
yeah. 9-3 is a great record. Um, and yeah, I mean, I won the top eight. All my matches went to 5 games. Uh, I got lucky in some spots. I played horribly in some spots. My opponents played horribly in some spots. Uh,
There was
and
one of your opponents, I
I
won't
ended up
say who.
walking away with the trophy, which of course changed the direction of my Magic pro life forever. Really, um, I went into the event needing top 75 for gold, and top eight got me platinum. And at least tied me for Rookie of the Year with Jesse Hampton, the only player to get platinum and not make Rookie of the Year in his rookie year. And winning the event also qualified me for Worlds, but also just I got a bunch of writing and sponsorship opportunities and a lot more attention than even if I'd come second that I would have gotten. And it's as I guess as someone who came second, but it's whether it's a boon or a curse. Certainly at the time, you know, and like I wasn't gonna. I still have habits, so I'm not gonna don't fly first class all the time or like that. But I just wouldn't have to worry if I wanted to order a soda with my meal.
Yeah, that was my second pro tour. So my first impression of you was
Yeah.
that you were a very good player, and
Well,
I also
thanks. I mean, I found that actually in the pro community, though, I did not get very much respect even after that result. I was kind of viewed as a fluke, which is fair. I think in the pro community, you tend to view people who put up consistent results higher than those who spike one event.
yeah, definitely, and
And
I mean
I
that's for good reason. But
following that, I didn't really feel respected in the pro community until basically early 2014 when I won my third Grand Prix of the year. Uh, and at that point, I think that even though Grand Prix aren't viewed as highly, it's just like I'd done enough winning that it was like, okay, this guy's legit. Um, it's it was definitely a life changing moment winning that pro tour, and kind of since then I've been always been qualified for every pro tour. Uh,
yeah, you're one of the more consistent players. I think you've been platinum or gold every year since then.
yeah, I think I've been gold. I think 2 years for the year following my pro tour win because I still wasn't that good back then, and you know there are also only three pro tours, so a little bit higher